welcome to the UAS Ketchikan Campus Library, where you can get a library card. So you have access to our academic collection, plus 3 million other titles across the state of Alaska. So my name is Kathy Bowling. This is Lana Clark, who's running the show tonight. We are live on Facebook. You are not in the image, but if you ask a question, your voice will be. And if you don't want that, you can give me the question and I can read it out loud to Dr. Lewis. And before I introduce Dr. Lewis, I want to introduce our new campus director, Dr. Bill Urquhart. Charmaine Lewis has a bachelor's in cell biology from the University of California, Davis, and a PhD in genetics, also from UC Davis, where she researched DNA interactions between hosts and virus pathogens. Makes Nudibranchs sound reasonable to talk about tonight. After completing the doctorate program, Dr. Lewis taught biology and scuba diving at California State University, Monterey Bay for 6 years. She took a break from academia to work for 2 years as a dive safety officer for the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and she joined UAS in fall of 2021 as our assistant professor of science. So thank you, Dr. Lewis, for doing a talk on, I can't want to say sea slugs, but that would be probably the only time. And if you didn't get a chance to see our sea slug beauty contest, it's on Facebook page. So
thank you, Kathy. Yeah, and thank you everyone who's here tonight and online listening in. I think before I jump into this talk about sea slugs or nudibranchs, I just wanted to give a little bit more, if you'll bear with me, background about why is Charmaine talking about sea slugs. So as Kathy mentioned, you have a background more on the biology side of things, which sea slugs have biology. But I teach kind of a wide range of science classes here at our Ketchikan campus, but quite a few of them do focus on physiology, health topics, but all for humans, not so much invertebrates. But the other sort of hat that I have worn in my past professional life is as a scuba diver and as a dive instructor. I was involved with quite a bit of research diving and science diving, both doing the research and the science, but also teaching students how to do that. And as Kathy mentioned, worked for the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which they've got an arm and quite a bit of different marine research. And so it's become a personal passion of mine that I still try to incorporate in my professional life as much as possible. And so I tend to be more stoked on the genetics and the physiology of these animals, but as a scuba diver, I am underwater and I get to see them firsthand, which is kind of fuels the passion. When considering topics for this Ask UAS seminar, I was talking with my colleague who's here tonight, Barbara Morgan, and she also teaches science courses here at our campus. Probably quite a few in the room are familiar with Barbara. And she does such a lovely job covering kind of all the plants and animals that we can find here in Ketchikan. And so we were chatting one day and it occurred to me, well, she's not a diver. And so she goes to low tide quite a bit and can see things that are within that low tide zone. But nudibranchs tend to be quite a bit deeper than the low tide zone. You can find some occasionally in the low tide, but quite a few more species exist kind of only where a snorkeler or a scuba diver would have eyes on it. And so she gave me the thumbs up. I got the seal of approval from Barbara Morgan to cover things deeper that we might find here in Ketchikan. Louder? Yeah, I'll try. I'm a quiet speaker. And so I'm hoping this might be the first of, many different talks about all the things that are deeper out in our ocean out here, right off of our shores. And so if you're wondering, if I can get my clicker to work, which currently it doesn't, but if you're wondering what a nudibranch is, I'm wondering too, because I can't change the slide. Lana, do you have a thought about why your yellow clicker might not work? I could always have you two change slide.
it should go.
Nope. It has a little battery thing that says not so happy.
And try it. We were
Yay!
fiddling with the sound.
Awesome. So if you're wondering what a nudibranch is, they are this colorful, kind of otherworldly, alien-looking creature, right? I've got one up there. It's got bright colors. It's soft and squishy. A slug may not immediately be something you think of as like a fuzzy, charismatic megaflora, you know, like a bear or an eagle or orcas. But I do think humans were drawn to them, and I think that's because they're colorful, because they have these strange shapes and they look like an alien creature, and yet they're here on our planet. And interestingly, they're a marine gastropod. They belong to the phylum Mollusca. So that means they're very closely related to things like clams and mussels and scallops, which all have shells. And so if you think, wait a minute, the sea slug's soft-bodied. So we'll talk in a minute. There's a point in its lifespan where it actually does have a shell. And so they're also related to things like an octopus or squid or cephalopod, that whole kind of class of animals. And their name itself gives you a lot of information about the animal. So if you break down if anybody's fluent in Latin or Greek, if you break down nudibranch, nudi means naked, and branch is a root word that means gill. And so they are considered a naked gill. And we'll talk about that in a minute. What does that mean? But it has to do with how they breathe and the fact that that's their organ for breathing is not internal inside their body the way it is for an animal. And where can you find these guys and gals? So I have this image up on the screen that's just like the entire world. And that's because you can find nudibranchs everywhere. So they're up in the Arctic Ocean. They're all the way down in the Antarctica. The majority, though, like many marine species, the most diversity of species are found close to the equator. So in the tropical kind of waters is where we see the greatest numbers of species. That doesn't mean that Alaska, got shorted or anything. We've got quite a few species here as well. Those numbers are changing all the time because there's a lot of ocean that we haven't explored. There's a lot of animals that we haven't seen or classified yet. And so they really are found in all temperatures of water. And if you're wondering how many species, I thought this is probably the most colorful slide of all the slides. I just included a whole bunch of different examples. These are all nudibranchs that I've found in various countries, diving kind of around the world. And the most recent total species in the whole world number that I could find published is from 2021. So already kind of outdated. And that was greater than 4,700 known species. And the reason, and if you've ever attended one of Barbara's talks, I'm sure she chatted about this too, with cryptic kind of species of animals like a nudibranch, a sea slug, meaning they're hard to see and get to. You have to be a diver or have a remote operated vehicle or some other way generally to classify them, to see them. Also, now we've got genetics, and so we can tell the difference between species, whereas before scientists were just using their appearance, their behavior, what they eat, are they mating with each other, that kind of data to determine one species from another. And so they're constantly being reclassified. At the end of the talk, I wanted to share some resources with you guys in different books, but even these books, they're already outdated. So the numbers are kind of constantly changing. So the species number may go up, may go back down when they realize, oh, this is actually same species. And then these two individuals are different species. So that happens fairly frequently in the animal and plant kingdom. But on the screen here, we've got some warm water species and also some cold water species. And you may notice they come in all these different colors. They also kind of have different shapes and appendages and things coming off of them. But as diverse as they are, there are some common kind of structures and themes about them. And so the anatomy physiologist in me, kind of can't but pause and talk about those. And so for tonight's talk, we're going to chat about two different styles or kind of flavors of nudibranchs. And one is a Dorid nudibranch, and the other, you pronounce that eolid. It's an eolid nudibranch.
Are those only two?
So there are more than that.
Really?
Yeah. Good question. So the Dorid up top in kind of the blue, you'll see it's got these different features to it. On the cartoon, it's got two in the front of the animal. It's got these two kind of appendages coming off the front of it called a rhinophore. And you may think, oh, that looks like maybe an eyeball or a seeing type of organ, but it's actually a smelling type of organ. So the root word rhino, kind of think of like a rhinoceros, big nose. So the rhinophore has a bunch of olfactory receptors in it, and it detects chemicals that are floating around in the ocean. So it's a way that animal can smell food, smell an enemy, smell something that might attack it, smell you, most likely, as a scuba diver if you were down there. So they're pretty sophisticated at detecting quite a small amount of chemical in the ocean. And then if you move along the dorsal, my anatomy phys students, there's a couple of them in the room, the dorsal edge of the animals, that's the back, you come upon the gills. So the gills are that roughly, my little plastic model up here, it's this roughly part. And that's where gas exchange happens on the animal. So that's their respiratory organ. And it's kind of, you might notice it's just sticking out into the elements. It's not inside of the body. So it's as if, our lungs were just hanging outside of our body, which hopefully some folks in the room are thinking that seems pretty vulnerable, and it's fluttering in the ocean breeze. That seems like a tasty treat for a fish or some other animal. And luckily they've adapted to have kind of this sphincter-like muscle that sits around the organ, and they can retract it. So they can take their gills and pull it into the body if they feel threatened. Generally, as a scuba diver, if you even get close or you're trying to take a picture near them, they'll retract. So they can detect possible danger, and they move those gill structure back inside their body where it's a little more protected. And then underneath the Dorid nudibranch, it's labeled there's a foot. That's a big muscular part, kind of similar if you're familiar with clams. Basically a giant muscle so that the nudibranch can kind of work its way along and move along the ocean floor. And if you look at the eolid nudibranch, has some similar features, the pink and orange one. It's got gills also called serrata, but they're arranged, instead of being like in a little tuft, they're kind of scattered along the whole back of the nudibranch. And you'll see in the future pictures on the presentation, they come in kind of all different shapes, sizes, colors, same purpose, gas exchange. This eolid nudibranch also has the rhinophores, the smelling organ. And then it has these two really long kind of appendages off the front of it called oral tentacles. Now, those are also, they have what are called chemoreceptors, meaning they detect chemicals. But instead of it being more what we think of as smell, these are more of a tasting organ. So it uses those oral tentacles to kind of shuffle food towards its mouth and taste the food that it's eating. Maybe determine, yuck, we don't want that. Yes, we like this one. So those are kind of some of the sensory organs that these animals have. And then a couple, just to keep it fairly brief and not go into like deep physiology of nudibranchs, but couple more facts about their physiology that I just think are cool. Despite how colorful they are, they're actually colorblind, which I find that really interesting when you come across animals and that they can't see color, but they themselves have like this crazy arrangement of colors. And I didn't really mention the eye spots, but they have smelling and tasting organs. Their eye spots are pretty difficult to either see or even get a picture of if you are a scuba diver or snorkeler. They're usually pretty nondescript, very tiny, and they are near the head-ish region of the nudibranch, but they don't see color, and scientists don't think that they see shapes all that well. It's more light intensity, so a little bit more to do with like circadian rhythms and seasonality of light. So mostly they're kind of blind and just smelling their way through life in the ocean. And then the second bullet point on the screen is another nod to my colleague, Barbara Morgan, because she said the most common question she gets is, can I eat that? And please don't eat the nudibranchs. They're definitely not edible. In fact, they're very brightly colored to prevent wildlife more than humans, but fish, crabs, things like that from eating them. So it's an advertisement to the world that they are poisonous. Some of them have really strong acids that they release when stressed. Some have stinging cells. Some have other poisons and toxins. They're definitely not an edible, although they look like candy, kind of. In fact, I have friends and I've heard other stories of divers actually witnessing a fish eating them and then spitting them right back out. And often it's a juvenile fish that hasn't learned its lesson yet, that these don't taste good. And then nudibranchs are hermaphrodites. So what that means is they've got both male and female reproductive organs that are in the same individual. And we'll chat more about that when we talk about how they mate and how they reproduce here in a minute. And then lastly, some nudibranchs are able to photosynthesize. So that's generally a trait we think of associated with plants. So plants have inside their cells, they've got a little organelle called a chloroplast that's able to take energy from the sun or light from the sun and make energy with it. So nudibranchs, some species will eat the algae that photosynthesizes, and they're able to take in those chloroplasts and keep them functional inside their own cells and undergo photosynthesis themselves, which is pretty cool kind of trait to have. All right, if you're wondering, how long do these things live for and kind of what does their lifespan look like? A nudibranch life cycle, it's pretty variable depending on the species. Many of them live to be about a year. That's it. They have about 1 year of time in the ocean. Many of them live only a few weeks, so even shorter amount of time. But they all start out as an egg. So they lay an egg case, and it can kind of look like on the top of the slide here, it's sort of ribbony looking and white, but some of them are bright red, orange, purpley. Some don't look like a ribbon. Some look more like grains of rice, like little kind of squiggly strings of rice kernels. But it's thousands of eggs, and they're always inside a mucus kind of coating. And that mucus coating is so that offers a little bit of protection from being eaten by other animals. And so within a couple weeks or so of being inside the egg, 10 days plus or minus, depending on the species, they'll hatch out. And at this point, they're called a veliger larva. And the veliger larva, the image I've got up here on the screen, it's from a microscope. So these are super, super tiny. You can't see them with your human eye. You have to use a microscope. And they spend that first part of their life kind of floating around in the ocean. They do have a way to sort of move. And at this point, they have a shell. So like a snail does, they can retract inside of their shell and be protected again, more or less, from being eaten or from other damage. And at this point, they're also eating very tiny, tiny microscopic animals like phytoplankton. And so they spend several weeks in this stage, up to about a month or so. They're just kind of floating around. And eventually they smell like, there's some good food over here. So they settle down where they know there's going to be food. So they're very food oriented, which is a lot like my dogs. And so about a month or so, they'll settle in a part of the ocean floor that has a good food source for them. And they'll undergo metamorphosis. So that is a lot like if you think of a caterpillar that becomes a butterfly or moth. They're really going to change their complete morphology, their physiology, the type of diet they eat, all of that changes. And they lose their shell. So they lose the shell during that metamorphosis stage. And that can take several hours, maybe up to a day for that full process to happen. And at that point, they have the adult form again. But they are still microscopic. So they're very, very tiny, but they look basically like an adult. They've got the rhinophores, the smelling organs, they've got the gills, but they're super, super tiny. So then they do a whole bunch of growing and they get up to full adult size. And within a month or so, then they can start laying eggs themselves. And the cycle kind of goes around again. And if you're wondering, okay, what size are the adults? This is fairly accurate to scale for some species. Some species, though, here in Alaska are very small, closer maybe to like your thumbnail size, but some can get up 6-8 inches. So there's a lot of variability between the species. And then another note about the fact that they're hermaphrodites or have both male and female. So on the slide here, I've got 2 different species and they're laying eggs. So the one on the left is a Dorid style, and it's got the white kind of ribbon of eggs. And the one on the right is the Latin name for that one is Dendronotus rufus. And there are 2. It may be kind of hard to see that there are 2 of these nudibranchs, but there's one kind of on the top and one towards the bottom of the slide. And they're laying more of those like squiggly style eggs that remind me of a bone cord, but I think that reference is lost on some folks, but other folks, we remember the phone cord. So we've got 2 species and they're together and they're laying eggs. So the advantage for the nudibranch to have both male and female reproductive organs is they're a fairly small animal. They move pretty slow, like a slug, and the ocean's really big. So if they had adapted to have separate sexes, meaning a male and a female would need to find each other to have successful reproduction, the chances are really almost nearly impossible, right? I feel like this is like some kind of dating app advertisement. But for nudibranchs to find each other, it's much more advantageous if they both have all the parts that they can fertilize and they both are capable of laying eggs. So you increase your statistic likelihood of continuing the next generation. And so that's the adaptation that they have. And kind of moving away from their life cycle and how they reproduce and what the Valentine scene is for nudibranchs, I did want to chat a little bit about how they eat. So these 3 images, they're all from the California Academy of Sciences, and they have this really killer scanning electron microscope there, which is kind of like a microscope on steroids. So it can see details and 3-dimensional imaging way beyond a light microscope, a basic microscope. And so the images are from 3 different species of nudibranchs, and they're all of a part on the nudibranch called the radula. So the radula is akin to like their mouth, not quite like teeth, not quite like a tongue, some sort of combination of both. And you can see they have like these hooks and comb structures, and they're different based on the type of food. So they're adapted to the favorite food of that species. So nudibranchs they're carnivorous. So they eat other animals. They eat corals, they eat sponges, they eat anemones, worms, small things mostly. But they use their radula, this kind of like gnarly looking, fish hooky looking thing, and they use it like a cheese grater. So they just grate up their prey, probably while it's still alive or actively dying, and they grate it up and then can ingest the smaller pieces. And so I just find that it's kind of, again, they look so cute, like a little piece of candy, so harmless, but they've got this crazy, cheese grater radula feeding mechanism. And scientists have noted all these different structures corresponding to the type of food that they prefer or what they focus on for eating.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
That slide that you just showed us,
Yeah.
are those 3 different species, or are those 3 different mechanisms within one feeding system on one nudibranch?
Yeah, good question. So, and I think your voice probably picked up on the streaming, but the question was, I'll repeat, just was, what are those 3 different radula feeding strategies, or pictures of 3 different species? And they're 3 different species. So each species, and that used to be one of the ways that they would speciate nudibranchs, was partly by looking at the radula and comparing it to others of that same species, and they should all it'd be like looking at all of our tongues and be like, yeah, they're humans, they all have the same tongue. So they would use the radula shape to determine which species. Yeah, pretty cool. I want one of those microscopes. We can get on that, huh, Bill? Another type of feeding strategy, a little different. This nudibranch is found here. This picture was taken here, actually, near Clover Island. And this is the Latin name. The genus is Melibae. The species Leonina. Common names get kind of, Barbara and I agree on that one, that common names are annoying because they change by region. People refer to them as different things, but the common name for this nudibranch, it's sometimes called the hooded nudibranch, which is fitting because it has this hood kind of structure on the front of its head, or lion's mane nudibranch, and you can see all the little fringe. So the way this nudibranch eats is it has all this little fringe that's kind of, it'll sweep it through the ocean water, and when the fringe detects a small food item, animal has landed on it, it'll clap shut, and it's then can trap that prey and eat it in that way. And so it's a lot like I'm blanking on the name, a Venus flytrap. So the plant, carnivorous plant, if you're used to seeing that, Melibae leonina feeds in that way. So it kind of sweeps its hooded mane in the ocean and can trap animals in that fashion. So after they're done eating, if they want to move around, we mentioned that muscular foot, and they generally move kind of along the ocean floor or rocks or things like that. But they're also capable, if I can, my video, yeah, they're capable of taking that muscular foot and alternating contractions of those muscles. And in that way, they can kind of undulate through the water column, essentially. So this is another Melibae leonina. The fringe is tucked in right now on its hood, so you can't really see it because it's not actively feeding. But see if I can get it to play again. Just it is able to successfully essentially move in the water column. Not very quickly though, and not with any kind of great direction. So we don't generally see nudibranchs moving through the water column for long periods of time or even over long distances. But they are capable of doing that if they need to, or if they get kind of blown off the rock by surge or other, ocean current movement. They are able to use their foot in that fashion. And if you're wondering, okay, what does a nudibranch do on a Friday night? Are they out there meeting other nudibranchs? Are they social? It turns out they're pretty not social. They're mostly alone. They live mostly solitary. The two white nudibranchs you can see on the right side of the screen, they're the same species. They're together. They're probably mating. So that's generally the only reason you would see two together. On the left, I took this image. I was near Malaysia, I believe. But they're clearly two different species. It's in the tropics. It could be happen chance that they're near, or one is trying to eat the other one. So they do eat each other. So that's a lot of the species are opportunistic in terms of they'll eat another nudibranch, another species. So they're not very neighborly. They are either there to mate or they're there to eat you. So they don't see lots of the same nudibranch kind of hanging out or lots of different species socializing the way we might imagine other animals do. And then I did want to just wrap up the talk tonight by covering some of the species that we see here. The nearest I can tell, again, with the species number changing all the time, it's somewhere around 100, give or take quite a few, that we might see in Alaska. NOAA, if you're familiar with them, they have some data on that. If you look more from like Alaska down to Baja, the whole kind of Pacific Ocean area, there's a few hundred species that are found there. And so if you were following on Facebook, our librarian staff had this really fun beauty pageant that they were posting daily leading up to the talk. So you may see some of those species on Facebook as well. And so I tried to pick some different ones just so we could have that variety. And so the first one I chose, that these are nudibranchs you might see out here outside of Ketchikan. And this one is the Latin name. The genus is Dendronotus, and the species is Iris. And the common name, folks refer to this as the giant nudibranch or the rainbow nudibranch. And they're pretty apt common names. That is one place I like the common name, is sometimes it's more descriptive. And so the giant nudie fits because these can get to be pretty large in size. They're very visually, as a scuba diver, you can easily see them, even from a distance, that, hey, there's a nudibranch. And then the rainbow part is fitting because they come in all these kind of variety of colors, anything from orangey, purple, reds, to the white that you can see on the right side of the slide. And Dendronotus iris, they really like to eat tube anemones. So if you find a tube anemone too, sometimes you'll see them wrapped around it and just using that radula to like break and cheese grate it down and eat the whole thing. And they also are very good at that undulating kind of swimming motion that we see in the water column. And the second species I chose for this evening is, the Latin name is Lamasia cockerelli, and the common name is cockerel's dorid, also sometimes called the orange clubbed nudie. And hopefully you can kind of tell that the serrata and the kind of all along the back of the animal, they look like clubs. So it's sort of a white stalk and ends in like an orange kind of ball club thing. And creepily, the orange is actually from their victims or their prey that they eat. So it's like they're wearing a little cloak of their dead food. And so that bright orange color comes from, these guys eat orange bryozoans. If you're familiar with a bryozoan, it's very simple, very small animal. And it has a bright orange pigment. And then they reposition that pigment up and make nice pretty frills for themselves in that way. And this one is the Dorona abelinata, also called white-lined Dorona or alabaster nudibranch. And they're really beautiful. They're serrata. Instead of looking more narrow and like kind of frilly, they have a very wide, kind of flat blade-like look to them. But they're still a breathing, respiratory organ part of the animal. And they've got a crazy jaw on them actually. So in addition to the radula, they eat snails and they're able to like crush the shell with their jaw. So they're pretty gnarly, pretty efficient at eating. And then they've got this strange feature where and I don't recommend this to anyone who is a snorkeler or a diver because it's just kind of cruel, but if they're very stressed out, if they're encountering a lot of stress, they're able to shed their serrata completely. Yeah, just like a lizard's tail, how it'll drop it and then it can regrow it, but obviously that's very energetically costly to the animal, but not as costly as being eaten and dying. So that trade-off, those adaptions that we see in nature. And if you're wondering, okay, if it loses the serrata, how is it breathing in the meantime? Because they don't regrow super fast. Most nudibranchs are actually able to breathe through their skin as well as through the gills and the serrata. So they kind of have a backup system to be able to exchange gas, even if they were to lose their gill structures. And this one is called, I don't have a common name for it, but the Latin name is Flabellina trophina. Most divers I know refer to it as Flabellina, which is kind of confusing because that's the genus and there's several species of Flabellina. This one though, I'm trying to remember where I took this picture. It was here off the road system in Ketchikan. And I liked this image for all of you tonight because the one on the left, you can see in the eelgrass, if you look closely, it's wrapped around and it's actually laying eggs. So it's got that bone cord kind of swirly white line in there. Those are the eggs from that nudibranch that it's actively laying. And then on the right, you can see it's a nice example of that eolid style nudibranch where it's got the smelling rhinophores and then those big long oral tentacles off the front that help it to kind of taste and check out the food that it's considering eating. And then this one, Hermesinda Crassicornis I included because it has a story that involves genetics, and I'm going to ever be the genetics nerd, so that's my background. It's sometimes called, the common names are opalescent nudibranch or thick-horned nudibranch. So on the screen, I've got two different species. One is Hermacinda opalescens on the left, and then on the right, Hermacinda crassicornis. So Hermacinda opalescens you can find basically from California south into Mexico. Hermacinda crassicornis on the right you can find from California up here through here to Alaska. But scientists and divers and folks who were looking at these things originally thought it was all one species. And on the slide, I know they look pretty different in those two pictures just by your eye, but quite a few of the individuals look very similar, actually. I chose two images that look pretty different so you can see the differences. Crassicornis on the serrata, on the gills, you can see a nice, bright, distinct white line. And that's not present on the opalescens serrata. And then kind of recently, to me recently in 2016, maybe not recently to everybody in the room, but in 2016, which scientifically was not that long ago, they actually sequenced 4 genes from these two different types of individuals and determined their separate species. So the genetics were different enough that they reclassified them. They used to all be consider one species, and they split it. And so the ones we would see up here, again, are the crassicornis ones. If you saw opalescens, that would be interesting because it would have ranged maybe from California up. And then there's all these questions probably surrounding, like, are there hybrids? What's going on with the mating? Lot more always to know about our oceans. And then the last Ketchikan local species that I chose, because it has such a fun common name, is Eolidia papilosa, and the common name is shag rug nudibranch, and I'm assuming because it looks like a shag rug. And you can still see the rhinophores coming off the top of it. And its neat feature is they eat anemones, and I think most folks are familiar that anemones sting. They sting, that's how they eat. They can sting you. They have these little cells that sting. And so the shagrug nudibranch will eat the anemone, and the stinging cell goes all the way through its digestive tract, and it repositions that little stinging cell, like unfired or unstung, up into its serrata and its gills. So now it stings things. So kind of similar to the photosynthetic nudibranchs and the orange clubbed one. They like to eat their food and then repurpose the properties of their prey in their own body, which I just find is like a very fascinating trait to have adapted to. And so with that, I'll leave you with some more beautiful pictures of different nudibranchs from around the world. And I wanted to keep the talk short enough tonight that we didn't put everyone to sleep, and also, left time for questions in case anybody has questions. And then I did, before I completely wrap up and take questions, I did want to chat about a couple resources, because I've had folks ask me if there's any good books out there. Kathy's a librarian. She's a great person to ask about books. But there's Whelks to Whales. If you've never, I don't have a copy of that one up front. That's a really good one. And then there's this Marine Life of the Pacific Northwest. And you're welcome to come up and take pictures of the front if you want to be able to find it later. This one's not fully nudibranch specific, but has a bunch of other marine life. And then there's an out of print book that actually the species have changed quite a bit, I've noticed, since they published this one, but it's still a fabulous first resource. It's Pacific Coast nudibranchs, and you can still find it. I just looked earlier today on, there's online used bookstores that sell, because it's no longer in print. But with that, and before I take questions, the Alaskan nudibranchs, there's kind of a big gap in knowledge. So if there's any budding scientists in the room that really want to get out there and research more, find the next new species of nudibranch, it could be you. We don't know as much about Alaskan nudibranchs. So yeah, and with that, thank you guys all.
Dr. Lewis, we have a question from one of the Facebook viewers.
And she asks, do they mate two ways? I'm not going to interpret that.
Top or bottom. Okay, so the question was, do they mate two ways?
Like, will both individuals get pregnant or just one of them?
Yes. So, well, the answer is a little more nuanced. So, land slugs do this too. They actually, some have ways to like basically duel it out and fight who's going to be the pregnant one, which makes sense. So, because it's energetically very costly to lay the eggs, so different species do different things. Some species, they both essentially have a penis. They both exchange fertilization. They both create and lay eggs. Some kind of fight it out, and they even can send a dart with sperm-like cells into the other one and impregnate them that way. So it can kind of vary, but sometimes, yes, both will get fertilized, both will lay the eggs. Other species, it's sort of a battle to figure out who's fastest at fertilizing the other one. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
I don't know if no. I don't. Yeah, it's like asking if I have a favorite dive site or a favorite place to dive. I think they're all so unique and cool in their own way. And I think also, just like if folks in the room who aren't divers or don't get in the ocean that way, if you ever, walk in nature, attend Barbara's classes and do field trips in the forest, I think when we encounter in the wild, whatever species it is, even if it's an eagle, which we see all the time here, right? It's still a really special experience. It's still like, oh, I just saw this, and like it's in its environment, and you have that kind of connection for a moment. And so, yeah, I don't really have necessarily a favorite one. Yeah.
How deep did the nudibranchs are they found?
Yeah, how deep are they? So, you can see some at the low tide. So, I mean, as shallow as like 5 feet, right? 5 or 10 feet. And then they found them in thousands of feet as well in the deep ocean, which is still kind of the area that we haven't explored fully yet, which you're probably aware of. Yeah, they're still kind of, they're sending ROVs down and trying to learn, but they found a lot of deep sea nudibranchs as well. And a lot of those are clear. They're not colorful, like a lot of deep sea animals that don't have any kind of light. They tend to be clear like that. They're really cool. One, it's like angel something. If you look it up, yeah, they're really neat. So all depths, it seems like. Yeah.
Do you have any information about like the sea lemon smelling like citrus and then the hooded one smelling like watermelon?
Yeah. So the question was how they smell to us. And even the Melve leonina to me is citrusy smelling. I think some people think it smells watermelony if you touch it. So the key there is when you touch them, it's a defense. So they're scared basically, and they're trying to like. So to us, maybe lemons and limes are tasty and good. But if you've ever given a lemon or a lime to your cat or your dog, most animals, citrus is like a deterrent. It's not a pleasant taste or smell, and so it's more of like a defense, reason, not for our own pleasure. Like they smell good, and they look like candy. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
What is their biggest predator?
Yeah, great. Yeah, because they are poisonous. Most things. Some fish can successfully eat them. Crabs. There's certain species of crabs that will eat them, and then other nudibranchs are the other big. And not that many make it to adulthood. Like a lot of marine organisms that kind of broadcast spawn or what and when they start out so small and so microscopic, their chances are kind of low. That's why they have thousands in the egg to increase the chance that maybe a couple are going to make it. And I don't know the number on that, like what percent make it to adulthood. That'd be a great, and that may be that folks don't really know. They might have estimates, but yeah.
Is there a season of breeding?
Yeah, the other question was, is there a season of breeding? It's different for each species. And if I'm not, I don't know familiar with like each species when their season is, but you do see them laying eggs kind of frequently, it seems like, in certain times of the year. But I think they're using a lot of that the light differences to determine partly that too. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
How many have you been able to identify here?
Like me personally, here I've seen. I don't have pictures of them, but maybe like I think now, maybe 8 or 10 species that I've seen. I haven't been diving here as long as I dove where I lived previously. So as Kathy mentioned, we moved here, except for the job in 2021. So still seeing more of them every day. Yeah. And in fact, I see some divers in the room too that probably have much higher numbers than me of identified nudibranchs.
What about in life? Have you seen more outside of Alaska?
Yeah, I've dove in quite a number of different countries, and they have seen tons there. And what I would often do when I was there diving is, take pictures of stuff or try to kind of snapshot in your brain, and then after the dive, like pour over these books and try to find it and talk to the people who dive that area a lot and have eyes on it a lot, because there's really a lot of nuanced difference sometimes between the species. It's hard to, two different species look very close, very similar. Yeah.
What was your favorite country to go and dive?
Oh my gosh. I've dived in all the different places.
Have you been to the Philippines?
Yeah. I have not dove the Philippines. I've dove through parts of Malaysia and Indonesia, which are kind of over in the part of the South Pacific. Yeah. Very pretty stuff there.
You mentioned them eating other species. Will they eat their own species?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if they will.
I don't know.
I don't think that they generally do. Yeah, because I think they would just mate.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
But that's a good question. Yeah. I'll admit the edges of my knowledge on it. Yeah, I don't. My guess would be no, that it would just be territorial, kind of like other species that, especially that might eat their eggs or that might eat their food. Yeah.
So talking about the ones that kind of assimilate their prey into a function, do you know of any that do that with bioluminescence?
Yeah, they definitely. Some even get bioluminescent. They glow. Some shine a UV light. So I've done some diving with UV lights, which is kind of a whole other experience at night.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have a filter over your mask. And some glow, and I don't know enough about why or what species or
Mhm.
what the purpose would be.
Sort of blue light or purple light? Do you know?
It's like a purpley-ish, like a black light. Like you
Okay.
think of, you have when you were in high school with your black light poster. Yeah, similar type of light. It's a specialty like diet light.
Oh,
that
okay.
I don't
I was-
even know if that company makes it anymore, but yeah, there's a couple people in the room that would know exactly where to buy it and when to get it. But yeah, it was a neat experience to see what things are glowing in the ocean. Quite a few. Alan?
Are the nudibranchs here more plentiful than you find them in warmer waters?
Like numbers of individuals or numbers of species?
The number of species.
Well, I guess the truest answer is we don't really know, right? Because there could be species out there that haven't been identified. My experience, there's more species closer to the equator, which tends to be true with a lot of marine animals. But we have we have hundreds of species that are within Alaska waters. Whether you're not going to see them all in one dive. You got to get out there and dive different spots. Yeah.
Are they in all the oceans?
Yeah, they are all across. Yeah, everywhere in the world. It seems like all depths so far from what we've explored and know. Yeah, pretty wide range of adaptation to live in all these different temperatures, different conditions, different light intensities, all that.
Is the sea angel a nudibranch?
Yeah, I think that might be the deep sea. There's one that's deep sea that
that's-
has the angel, and it has like appendage coming out the side.
This one.
Oh
Yeah, and I think that one is a nudibranch, and I want to say it's deep ocean.
Oh, yeah.
Look
That's
it
right.
up.
Yeah,
From like the Arctic.
Those are,
yeah, cold.
Yeah,
cold.
cold.
Do they survive freezing, like at the poles? Like, could there be ones that are frozen in the ice that could come to life in 1,000 years?
Oh yeah.
Probably.
My guess is no. They're probably more short-lived and or hanging out in parts that don't freeze deeper down, perhaps, and or have a cell structure that doesn't freeze. If you have less water in the cells, then they won't. Fresh water, then it won't freeze over. The tissue won't. There's all kinds of adaptations that cold, marine organisms have developed.
I guess as a follow-up, then I'm thinking like, is there fossil evidence from millions of years ago of nudibranchs?
Oh,
That would be super hard.
that would be so hard because
Yeah,
they,
so squishy.
yeah, the
Yeah.
squishy stuff doesn't. Maybe a veliger, like a microscopic, like with their shell, maybe when they're in the veliger larva stage. Yeah, because most fossilized things are hard parts that sit into the sediment and create the imprint, So any squishy things from long time ago, we don't really have evidence of. Yeah. Lana, yeah.
This one's off of the chat. It says, "Are they only in salt water?"
Oh yeah, good. That's funny. I just had a conversation earlier today about freshwater and which are in fact leeches, not very different thing. No, they're a saltwater organism. We do have land terrestrial slugs and other closely related things that live in freshwater. But a nudibranch, it's a saltwater. Sorry, I don't mean to point, but I don't know your name.
No, that's okay. So for the nudibranchs that live in more shallow waters that are potentially uncovered by really low tides, do they have any adaptations to deal with like all of a sudden being exposed to air, or do they just kind of like
Yeah,
deal with it?
yeah, good question. I also
They
had
don't
this
look as
conversation
pretty,
earlier with Barbara. We were talking about low tide. She has a field trip on Saturday, and they're going to the beach. So I was hoping that they would see some nudibranchs, but usually, so they're capable of moving. They must sense tidal changes, and my guess is they move deeper, and so that's partly why you don't see as many in the shallow, even at low tide. The egg cases, I know they're covered in mucus, so it's a sealant sort in a sense, and kind of can keep moisture in, and then they will retract their gills too. If you do find them at low tide, most of the time their gills are pretty retracted. Barbara's probably your best tide pooler person to ask to about that kind of thing. So they'll make changes to their little body home to try to seal in as much of the moisture as possible and not dry out. And then the tide change, happens quick enough that they shouldn't have. And like a lot of those low tide, where they get under rocks, away from the sun, that kind of thing to help protect. Yeah.
They don't look as pretty out of the water. They're like a blob.
And droopy. Yeah, they don't have the like flowing look to them when they're not in the water. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I was
Please
just
do.
gonna.
Yeah.
The ones I find on the beach are usually like underneath kelp or in between, eelgrass kind of, and in little puddles or underneath like the edges of a rock. So they're all kind of like hiding pretty well or in a little bit of water. And the ones that can retract their gills have retracted their gills. But still, I've found like 5 or 6 different species on the beaches around here over the years.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned how they see, but where do we actually find their
I
eyes
know.
and how do we find their eyes? Or
Yeah. I personally, I've never seen them other than in photos on the internet. And that's another great resource. There's a seaslugforum.net, which I think might no longer be like actively updated, but it's got all this resource and there's some pictures of the eye spots on there. But you would expect them to be near the rhinophore. So like on this animal here, they would be near in this head region, and they may even just look like a divot in the skin, and that's it. Like no, not like an eyelid or any kind of might just look like a little hole. Nothing else. They're nothing like the vertebrate eye or even they're just not. It's more like a light detecting nerve
more like a
receptors,
light sensor.
cluster of nerves that are sensing
They
light.
might be on top of it.
Some are a little more kind of on the top, which is that behind the rhinophores here. This would be the top. And this one, the gills are kind of more of like the cabbage lettuce leaf looking. Yeah.
Flower bud.
Yeah.
I know I forgot what the other name was other than the opalescent, but we see a lot of those ones here in the summer and stuff and whatever in the winter. But they look opaly, like they're like glowy like that. So those aren't opalescent then. They're
No, they shouldn't. Yeah, they have the white line on the gill. It's crassicornis.
I still hear people calling them opalescent, even though it's the same common name on the two different species. That's not uncommon with common names.
Yeah.
People often use the same common name on different species.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
yeah.
Because they might be calling it opalescent or.
But it's not.
It's not.
What is it?
Crassicornis. Yeah. Hermesenda is the genus, and then crassicornis.
We've seen the clown one, the white and orange ones.
Yeah,
Those
they're
are
very
fun.
cool. And I think Kathy
They're
posted
great.
one of those on the beauty pageant.
Oh.
The clown. Yeah. Yeah.
This other day, I saw one of the hooded ones swimming.
Oh, cool.
Remember?
It's mesmerizing. Yeah, I've heard several people say that they've seen them swimming just by looking over from the docks and noticing. So maybe next time if you see something kind of white, clearish looking that's moving through the water, it could be right. Yeah.
I was surprised that their lifespan was that short. Do you know, like, are they just genetically set for senescence early, or is it more just a factor of like changing ocean temperatures and then like when the season changes, they're done because it's a big shift, or you know?
There's not all that many long-lived invertebrates in general, and even like the phylum Mollusca, they're not. I mean, even octopus, they don't live. I mean, they live longer than a year, but a handful of years. You know, I mean, there's not. Not being a expert in evolutionary biology, I'm not sure where that comes from, like short-lived versus longer-lived. You'd have more, just fitness stuff over evolutionary time. I'm assuming why something would live for a really long time versus it's much more costly to have a, longer lifespan with like more reproductive years and all that. So yeah, I don't know. The more simple organisms seem like they live shorter periods of time and but have greater generation turnover, yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. Yeah. Just my background isn't in that like those like really in-depth evolutionary biology. I find it fascinating though. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah.
Some of the larger nudibranchs, they're good size, like the size of your fist. How long do they live? You would think it'd be inefficient just for them to die after a year.
I know they must grow fast, huh?
Nudibranchs grow all the way up.
Yeah. No, they're still kind of around a year. Yeah, they're not a very long-lived. Like the Dendronotus iris that you've seen. I know, I've seen you on dive seeing them. Yeah, they're like grow fast like a Great Dane and then don't live long. Yeah.
Them being bright in color, is that like a defense thing for predators, or?
Partly that's them being
Poisonous.
Poisons or acids or other chemicals that they release. So partly we tend to see that not always in nature, but often in nature that bright colored things are either mimicking that and trying to pretend to be the poisonous one, or they themselves are poisonous. And I imagine with the nudibranchs, there's some that are not poisonous, but they're mimicking some of the bright colored similar species, which is different because a lot of our organisms here are kind of built, so to speak, to be camouflaged, to blend in with surroundings and not be bright and stand out. So different strategies. Yeah.
So I was just thinking about how octopuses can change color, some species, and I wonder if any of these nudibranchs can do that.
Not to my knowledge. Yeah. And the octopus, they're really cool. The whole I'll do an octopus night. Yeah, they're like opening and shrinking their cell. They're actually changing. It's a communication pattern. They change colors or communicate. Yeah. There's a whole bunch. Octopus is a whole bunch. I'll open that door. They're very cool. They have a very cool nervous system. Yeah. Yeah. But to my knowledge, they don't. The nudibranchs don't change color. The biggest change would be from the veliger to when they undergo metamorphosis. Then they're very different looking. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll wrap it up there, but I'm happy to hang around. And there's lots of other folks in the room that have a lot of knowledge too, because I see some faces of divers and people who know our culture out here. So feel free to, until Kathy kicks us out, feel free to mingle and ask questions and have
Check out a
coffee.
book.
Check out a book. And thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.